This video is brought to you by Ground News. Donald Trump's abandoning of Ukraine has forced European heads of state to commit to big spending programs to beef up their country's military capacities. The European Commission President has planned to allocate 150 billion euros to a defence fund, whilst the German Chancellor-in-waiting has announced plans to allow unlimited borrowing to fund defence spending, as he promised to do whatever it takes to protect freedom and peace in Europe. But while these funds are helping to plug gaps in arms and equipment, one of the big remaining issues is manpower. Most European armies are already pretty small by historical standards, and numerous opinion polls conducted across Europe in recent years indicate that young Europeans are increasingly hesitant to enlist in the military. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Europe's conscription crisis, why it's becoming so hard to recruit young people, and what European nations are doing to get Gen Z on board. We're getting remarkably close to 1 million subscribers, and currently 72% of you haven't yet subscribed. So lend us a hand and subscribe today. Let's start with a little context on how mandatory military service has changed in Europe in the past couple of decades. During the Cold War and into the 1990s, compulsory military service existed in nearly every European country. Beginning in the early 2000s, most European states moved to get rid of conscription, moving from conscript to volunteer armies, mostly comprised of contract soldiers. As a result, national armies obviously got way smaller, with the total number of soldiers in the EU falling from around 3.5 million in 1995 to under 2 million in 2020. The decline was particularly sharp in the German and Italian armies, which shrunk by 85% and 66% respectively between 1990 and 2020. This speaks to a common misunderstanding about the German military. Often people imply that the German army is weak because of some post-war aversion to defence spending, but West Germany had a pretty substantial armed forces. Anyway, as a result, European militaries are facing an ageing workforce. For example, in Germany, the average age of soldiers increased from 32.4 years in 2019 to 34 years in 2024, while 28% of lower-ranking positions remain unfilled. This is a common problem across the continent, but in countries which got rid of conscription years ago, finding young recruits has been surprisingly difficult. In 2022, for instance, Czechia succeeded in recruiting only 176 new soldiers, while 2023, a record 9,000 professional soldiers left the Polish armed forces. Similarly, the UK experienced a net loss of 5,600 personnel, with more service members leaving than joining. This trend highlights another critical issue for European militaries: retaining existing soldiers. In Germany, over a quarter of the 18,810 individuals who enlisted in 2023 chose to leave during their 6-month trial period. Additionally, nearly 3,000 soldiers exited the military last year, a sharp increase from the 200 conscientious objectors recorded in 2021. So why are European armies struggling to recruit and retain young people? Well, it's quite simple. Young people just don't seem to be as keen to join the military anymore. You can get a sense of this by looking at young people's attitudes to mandatory conscription. A recent YouGov survey in Germany found that while 58% of Germans support reinstating conscription, only a third of those aged 18 to 29 share that sentiment. And it's the same story for other countries like Poland and Latvia. When it comes to willingness to fight for their country, the numbers are even lower. A Gallup poll from last year showed that just 32% of Europeans in the EU would be willing to fight for their country. In the Netherlands, only 36% of young people expressed a willingness to take up arms, while in the UK the figure drops to a mere 11%, whilst 41% of young Brits stated that there are no circumstances under which they would defend their nation. This might partly explain the appeal of parties that describe themselves as pro-peace, such as the far-right Alternative for Germany and the far-left Die Linke in Germany. Nearly half of voters aged 18 to 24 cast their ballots for these two parties in the parliamentary elections this February. Both parties oppose arming Ukraine and are somewhat sceptical of NATO, and a study conducted by the University of Amsterdam found that the voter base for these radical parties are generally less inclined to fight for their country compared to those who back more centrist parties like the Christian Democratic Union. So what exactly is going on here? Why have young people become so irked by the prospect of military service? Well, there's a number of reasons at play here that really an 8-minute video can't cover, ranging from the rise of individualism in affluent Western countries to a broader sense of disillusionment and distrust towards Western governments and their military interventions. But one of the more concrete factors is the current labour market. While wage growth has lagged behind inflation for the past couple of years, that's now changing, and a tight labour market is pushing up wages, especially for young workers. In such a tight labour market, the military, which typically offers lower salaries, is struggling to compete with the private sector and draw in young people, who are pretty keen on good pay given the pre-existing cost of living and housing crises. For example, in the UK, only 3 out of 10 armed forces members believe their pay is fair, and recent pay increases have lagged significantly behind the rising cost of living. Obviously, this presents a significant challenge for European armies looking to expand. So, what steps are European countries taking to fix this? Well, countries like the Netherlands and Croatia are focusing on making military service more appealing to young people by offering various incentives, including financial support and job opportunities. For example, Lithuania provides financial assistance to those who volunteer for military service, along with support for education and employment during and after their duty, while Estonia has initiatives like the Forces Cyber Conscription Program, which allows employers to send employees to serve in cybersecurity roles, enhancing their skills for civilian careers afterward. Some countries, like Poland, are looking at simply bringing back mandatory conscription in some form, but mandatory conscription is a much harder sell to countries that are relatively insulated from these threats. So nations like France are instead looking at a softer form of conscription, like national service. A lot of European governments have also started taking an interest in the so-called Scandinavian model of conscription, which some experts think is the most effective way to attract young recruits. Countries like Sweden and Norway have selective conscription, where candidates who perform well on certain aptitude tests are required to join the military for a limited period of time, usually around a year. Because it's selective, this model is both cheaper than universal conscription and means that military service is a valuable credential for anyone who wants to get a good job in the private sector afterwards. Nonetheless, even if this is the best model available, reinstating conscription of any form won't be politically easy. This story about Europe's military personnel shortfalls has been covered by more than 48 sources. Interestingly, we know that more than 15 of these have been reported by the left and 5 have been reported by the right. That's because this week's sponsor, Ground News, are experts on pulling back the curtain on media bias. Built by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news, they ingest over 50,000 articles from all over the world and then organise each by story. For each and every story, you can see the number of reporting sources, where these sources lead on the political spectrum at an individual level and group level, compare the headlines of each source, and read each article all without ever leaving the app. But one of the best parts of the app is their comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in left-leaning and right-leaning reporting. For example, left-leaning coverage framed European military shortfalls as exposed vulnerabilities exacerbated by Trump's inward-focused security stance, evoking a sense of abandonment with phrases like "home alone," while right-leaning outlets echoed the exposure of weakness and questioned the reliability of allies. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the unlimited access Vantage plan using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.